Hello and welcome to The Big Fight, and today it really is an ultimate show on the environment and what you can do to safeguard the environment and your own health as well, because today two separate themes that we're going to take which do coincide at some point or the other. One, the entire discussions that are taking place in Paris right now to try and save the planet. What happens with climate change? Who can do something about it? And of course, that eternal question, who's to blame for the mess that we are in right now? And then a slightly related question is, what do we need to do for our own sake? We've just seen some radical measures being announced in Delhi, one of the most polluted cities in the world, where, odd and even and all of those sort of things. So is that what we're going to be also resorting to? So lots to talk about, and I can tell you we've been able to assemble perhaps one of the ultimate environment panels that you can possibly have. Prakash Javadekar is going to be joining us in just a couple of minutes, the Minister of State for Environment, Forests and Climate. But right here in the studio, Sunita Narayan, Director, Center for Science and Environment, and MC Mehta, lawyer and petitioner against vehicular pollution. It's great to have you with us as well. And on a slight historical note, the very first story I ever worked on in my entire life as a TV reporter was to come and interview him for a program on traffic and pollution in Delhi. So, things sometimes stay the same. So thanks a lot for joining us. NDTV's own Swati Tyagarajan, editor environment and here at NDTV. It would be great to get your point of view. Dr. Vivek Nangia, director of pulmonology at the Fortis Hospital at Vasant Kunj, is going to tell us just what is happening to our lungs, if you really do want to know. Gardner Harris is about to join us from Washington. His piece on the fact that it is almost unethical to bring up children in Delhi really did spark off some sound and fury a short while back. Ashish Khaitan is joining us as well, spokesperson Aam Aadmi Party, on why the Delhi government has done whatever it has. But let's just start off by taking a look at the debate around climate change and what's happening in Paris. So I do want to go across to Paris, where we do have Nooper. Nooper is with us, who's been covering it there for a while. And she does have with her Meena Raman from the Third World Network, Jiafeng, who's a special representative, climate change negotiations at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from China. And Jake Schmidt is with us as well, Director, International Program, National Resources Defense Council. So, Nooper, lots of battling back and forth there on what can be done to save the climate. Are we going to get anywhere at Paris, or is that looking unlikely?
We are halfway through. 1 week of work has been done, a lot of closed-door sessions. What we have been hearing is that it's been very, very tense. And whether or not we will actually get an agreement, that of course has been the big question. But where we are at now is also a big question, because all this work that has gone in, the question that's being asked now is whether the developed countries have actually put in constructive work, or are they delaying everything?
I don't see any constructive movement really from the developed world. I think positions are still very far apart. They're very polarized. I think a major debate is really whether common but differentiated responsibility, historical responsibility, for instance, whether developed countries will show the lead, whether they are here really intend to be true to the convention, or whether they are trying to create a new regime which will weaken the obligations for them.
Create a new regime. Jake, what would you say to that?
Yeah, well, hopefully we can get an agreement. I think the challenge is in front of us this next week as we try to solve this. The consequences of not getting an agreement are too large. Obviously, we need a good agreement, not just an agreement. But the challenges are pretty big. We have to have developed countries come forward with, I think, clear signals on climate finance, and we have to find the right way to bring forward these kinds of commitments that countries have brought forward over the past year, where we have countries that account for more than 90% of the world's emissions have taken steps for what they're going to bring forward.
And if you're talking about commitments, is the developed world actually coming forward and committing to especially the climate finance commitments for countries like the US?
Yes, it is a commitment under the convention. And it is also a commitment also reached under the Copenhagen Accord.
But here your position is very comfortable.
Yeah.
But are you seeing, because you last year in November, the US and China also made a joint that you came together and you made pledges. But are things moving fast enough over here? Maybe Meena would probably disagree with Jake as far as I'm concerned, but since you are in a more neutral situation, do you think India can rely on China to push hard enough? Because you don't have much at stake here, is what I was saying.
We have actually we have a lot of stake here also. Yes, I think all countries, particularly developing countries, would have a lot of stake here. And
Right.
I think
Nupur?
the whole world have a lot of stake here. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, but Jake, the entire question of who is going to be, and I think there is some painting of people as villains right now. Isn't it a bit strange that you have a country like India, which may in absolute numbers be emitting a certain amount, but in terms of per capita emissions is one of the lowest among all major countries. So surely the responsibilities then have to be slightly different for countries like that. Surely every individual human being should be entitled to a certain amount of carbon, an equal amount of carbon.
You know, I would disagree that India is being characterized as villain. Well, actually, I think India is being perceived as being a blocker, but I don't think that's actually true. I think that what we're finding is that countries are trying to find the sweet spot, and I think there's always some misunderstanding on that. You know, India brought forward the Global Solar Alliance, which is a huge new initiative. They showed that they're going to be a leader on trying to help solar, and I think that's a key piece of the puzzle.
No, I disagree, because I do think that if you look at the mainstream media from the West, they are painting India as a blocker. And they are showing that countries who stand up for common but differentiated responsibility, countries who insist on equity, India is a very strong proponent of climate justice and equity. And I do think there is a media spin that's going on. And that I think we see in the halls.
Right, let me get Sunita in before I come back to you there.
You see
Sunita,
that
you have a
there
view
is
on
an
this?
attempt. Whether it's obvious or not, there is an attempt to rewrite the rules.
As far as climate change is concerned, be very clear. There is a very clear concerted move to move the burden from countries like the US to countries like India. Okay? We are the lowest on per capita terms. Our coal use, yes, is going to grow, but in terms of per capita, it's still 5 times lower than the US. And the US is today moving from coal to gas, which is also a fossil fuel. What appalls me is the silence of American NGOs to take up these hard issues with their government. Our Prime Minister talked about the carbon budget. There is about 1,000 gigatons of space that is left. The United States has already taken up 21%, will take up another 10%. And the American NGOs and the American media, in my view, is absolutely letting down the world.
So Swati, then I'm going to come back to Jake and get a view from there.
As the Prime Minister said, the commitment to cutting emissions has to be commensurate with the space any country takes up in the whole carbon budget. And I think with countries like the United States and the EU at a level as well, although they have made a better strides, I would say, in terms of clean energy as opposed to the United States, not in terms of they've made great strides.
Right.
So there is a problem. But I would like to say that one of the other problems is it's very easy to point fingers at countries like India, because a lot of how they're cleaning up is because we are manufacturing. So it's a lot of like they're sending their stuff across, and we're growing, we're manufacturing, and it's easier for them to clean up on that.
China also is a severe problem, because remember, the agreement that the Chinese and the Americans have signed is essentially about equity, in a way that the Chinese will increase their emissions, the Americans will reduce it, but they will both bring their emissions on a per capita terms to about 13 tons per capita. India is 2 tons per capita. So please understand, China has actually made a deal in its interest with the Americans to apportion the global atmospheric space so that the two polluters get an equal share. Now, that's disastrous for the entire world.
All right, Jake, if China and the US are both entitled to 13, on a per capita basis, why is India a villain at 1.7? And if India also gets to 13, then the entire planet is likely to face a catastrophic collapse.
U.S. needs to do more, clearly. We work in China as well, and I think there's an opportunity for China to strengthen its efforts over time. I think India is being perceived as a villain in the Western media in particular, but, I think there's a chance to actually change the tune by what comes forward in the rest of this time period, because India's got massive solar efforts underway in the country. It's got a target target that it plans to bring forward. It's not sitting on the sideline, but there is always this, I think, perception that, it makes it easy to have a good guy and a bad guy in Western media perceptions. And, for years and years, the U.S. rightly was the bad guy, and I think that's a key challenge.
I think there's a deliberate effort here to pinpoint that those countries who say that the principles of the convention and that this framework convention, which is really an important one for developing countries and developed countries, they have to be followed. Now that, I think, is being perceived as those who stand for that as being villains. So it's not just India, it's the like-minded developing countries as well. This agreement is about to be crashed, and that's the agenda that we have seen. So when you have developing countries saying no, it's not mitigation alone. It's everybody have to do the work, but the developed countries must acknowledge their historical responsibility, and there is this recognition that the developed countries gained their wealth in an unconstrained carbon emission world.
Right.
Today, there is a limited carbon budget, and that has to be distributed fairly. But no, the United States will not have any distribution of any budget because you have a nationally determined process. That multilateral process cannot tell the United States what it needs to do.
I think here in Paris, our job is to find really a solution to all of this, and we have only a week. And next week, our ministers would be here in multilateral diplomacy. I think the final touch would be a kind of agreement that might not be satisfactory to everyone.
Nina, do you think we will have an agreement firstly, and will it be satisfactory to anyone,
No,
especially the developing countries?
No, if the agreement is about enhancing what's in the convention, we will have an agreement. If it's an agreement to rewrite the rules and pass the responsibility to developing
Which
countries,
is what we've been seeing
there
thus
will
far,
be
at
no
least.
deal.
Couldn't you possibly have a solution around, we've always been talking about differentiated but common responsibilities for a while. So, yes, everyone should have a fair share of whatever the carbon budget is. That's principle number one. And principle number two, it's in everybody's interest to allow the developing world has to develop, whether it's India, whether it's Africa, they have to be allowed to develop. And it's in everyone's interest to try and do that in as carbon friendly a manner as possible. So frankly, what the West should be doing is paying a certain amount of money to enable these countries to develop well. And number two, to transfer technology to make sure that India or Africa or the rest of the countries in the developing world actually do get renewable and other technology.
Developed countries have reneged on that commitment of money and technology.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, we would not be in Paris today
But is this the right solution?
No, but Vikram, how can it be a solution when they have reneged on the deal? In Copenhagen it came, in Cancun it came up, it came up in Copenhagen, it came up in Durban. Now we're sitting on this entire debate again in Paris.
If the Indian government was to raise a bill for Chennai and all the other natural disasters that we are beginning to see, and link them to climate change as there is, and raise a bill to the international community now and stop asking for money as charity, but ask for it for damages and for the loss that we are suffering. Maybe that's the way ahead.
Mr. Javadekar is joining us, the Minister of State Independent Charge for Environment, Forest and Climate Change. We are seeing to some extent India is again being vilified to some extent, that India is blocking progress. Is it also because we're not being able to get the message across correctly? And our message really should be that actually India is one of the lowest emitters, and not what we sometimes tend to say, India won't be pushed around. That's bad PR. Should we be talking more about the fact that actually, we are one of the lowest per capita emitters?
It is not only low per capita. It is low in absolute terms also. Let me tell you, many people describe India as the third largest emitter. It is sequentially wrong, and it is content-wise also wrong. So I have rephrased it. Sequentially we are number 4, but we are small emitters. Because what is the current emission status? China 29%, US second 16%, Europe third 10%, and India fourth 5%. First 3 put together are 56%, and we are 5%. We are 1/10 of first 3. People are saying India using coal and it will use more coal, but our coal consumption is less than 1/2 of that of US in absolute terms even today. And they are using gas, which is also fossil fuel.
Okay.
Our non-fossil fuel is 40% target. They are only 30% target.
When you're flying there, what essentially, I mean, look, it is in India's interest also to get a deal done. So what essentially is the message that you're going to be taking, that look, India is happy to do its part. India is ready to try and cut its emissions, maybe not an absolute cap on emissions because that's difficult for us to do, but we will try and do whatever we can. Why don't you help us by A, transfer of money, and B, transfer of technology? Is that what you're going to be telling people there?
It is more than that. It is little more, because we are saying that, see, though India is not part of the problem, it wants to be part of solution, because we are suffering. If we are Chennai, Uttarakhand and Jammu Kashmir and droughts and more spell of floods all over, it means there is a climate change impact also. But there is one dichotomy. If you go with the case of Chennai for loss and damage, the developed world says, oh, it's not a conclusive case of climate change. India is going more proactively with more positivity and more with instead of opposing, which was the earlier position of India, we are now proposing. Like India initiated Solar Alliance. India became partner of Mission Innovation. We will be proposing many new things. They are on cards.
So what, to your mind, is a sort of a deal that you would be happy with and which you think you might be able to sell to everyone else?
I will be happy if the deal is under the convention, with CBDR, equity and all other principles made intact, simultaneously making progress, that every country contributes as per their respective capacities, they report and they implement it.
Will you also have the PR in mind that you don't want India to be painted as a country that destroyed the world, however untrue it is? Because you're seeing a lot of that in the Western media, by the way.
But Western media, unfortunately, is not free media like India. And I'm proud of Indian media. But unfortunately, foreign media, as you know, I think Sunita is on the panel now.
Yes, Sunita is here. She's listening to you.
She presented a very wonderful report on the consumption of two worlds. And what happened? Because it has some exposing America's unpleasant truth, inconvenient truth. The inconvenient truth presented by Al Gore were appreciated by all world. But now inconvenient truth about America, the foreign press is not ready to even listen, not ready to acknowledge. So that's a different media. People understand it. See, negotiations don't happen through newspaper or TV channels headlines.
We've just seen what's happened in Delhi, for example, the levels of air pollution and the radical measures that have just been taken in Delhi. What is your reaction to what the Delhi government has done?
No, every government has to act, because we have asked all agencies to do more and more. Here we have asked Punjab government, Haryana government, Delhi government, Uttar Pradesh government, Rajasthan government, all the 15 corporations within the Delhi airshed area, and all the 3 corporations plus all the NDMC and DDA and other agencies, police as well. So every agency has to do more and more so that we clean up act as early as possible. Though it's a backlog of 10 years, we have to clear in 2 years.
So you welcome what's happened in Delhi?
In a way, yes, everybody has to try more so that, but they should not then go back and forth. Okay. Otherwise, the credibility of action goes.
All right, Mr. Javrikar, thank you so much, sir, for joining us.
Thank you.
We wish you all the best in Paris. Let's hope we do come up with a really good deal out there. All right, Nupur, just want to say thank you to you, and any final comments that anybody may have.
One last short comment before we go.
Going on the basis of enhancing the contributions of everyone according to what's provided in the convention, and we are not about to ditch the convention, then we will have an outcome. But if we are only shifting a lot of responsibility and not taking responsibility by the developed world, then you will have an unfair outcome, and I'm not sure whether the developing countries will stand up for that.
Well, I think the minister's right that these are not negotiated in the press. These are negotiated in rooms, and I think it's really critical that world leaders come together over the course of the next week and try to solve this, because the consequences of not acting on climate change are too large to the United States, they're too large to China, they're too large to India, they're too large to the small island states, to the least developed country. And we have a moral obligation to deal with this challenge, which means that the United States and other developed countries have to lead in this effort, but we also need to have a global effort that solves this problem. And we have to do it right, and I suspect that India will get an agreement that doesn't cross its red lines.
Also, Vikram, one last comment also from Mr. Gao Peng. India and China on the same platform in a multilateral forum. That's very rare, Vikram. So
yes. For in the climate change context, it has been 25 years since China and India have worked together all the way down to here, to Paris. And I think in the climate change context, China and India would always work together. Not only with regard to climate change, but also on a lot of other issues. A lot of issues relating to sustainable development and a lot of other things.
So that's a positive note there, Vikram, from Paris, even though as far as the agreement and the text itself goes, it's still really a big fight.